The garden of unspoken words. Some secrets have a way of growing in the dark, like flowers that bloom only when no one is watching. And sometimes, on a quiet evening when the world feels just right, those secrets finally find their way into the light. The smell of wet earth and spring roses always made me think of Michael. Strange, I know, but that's how it was. He had been part of our world, part of my garden for almost 30 years now. David, my husband, and Michael. They came as a set from the very beginning. I first met David in that old college library, with books piled high and dust dancing in the afternoon sunlight. Michael was right there beside him, tall and awkward, like a friendly shadow that never left David's side. Now, all these years later, that shadow had grown older. His dark hair was touched with silver at the sides, and tiny lines had appeared around his warm eyes. But he was still Michael, steady as a rock, dependable as sunrise, and somehow always around when we needed him most. Our house was special to us. David and I had bought it when we were young and full of dreams. We spent countless weekends fixing it up, sanding the old wooden floors until our backs ached, painting walls until our arms were sore. Every corner held a memory, every room told a story of our life together. The front porch was my favorite spot. It stretched wide across the front of the house, with white pillars and a roof that kept the rain away. On evenings like this one, when the hot day was finally cooling down and the sky was painted in soft purple and pink colors, felt like the most peaceful place on earth. I sat there now, holding a cup of chamomile tea that had gone lukewarm in my hands. The crickets were just beginning their nightly song, a gentle chirping that seemed to welcome the approaching darkness. Somewhere inside the house, David was probably glued to his television, watching another one of his history shows. This week, it was all about Roman water systems, how they built those amazing structures to bring fresh water to their cities. He could watch that stuff for hours. The old iron gate at the front of our yard creaked as it opened. The latch had been crooked for years, and David always promised to fix it, but never quite got around to it. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. Michael had a particular way of moving, quiet and careful, like he didn't want to disturb the peace around him. I knew that walk as well as I knew the sound of our old grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. "Good evening, Eleanor," he said, his voice deep and warm, with that hint of a smile he always seemed to carry. He walked over to the wicker chair, across from mine, the one that always made a soft groaning sound when someone sat in it. That chair had been there for 15 years, and the sound it made was as familiar as Michael's greeting. "Michael," I said, looking up at him with surprise. "I didn't hear your car. Parked down the street," he replied, settling into the chair. "Felt like taking a walk tonight. Beautiful evening for it." He glanced toward the house. David busy, solving the mysteries of ancient plumbing again. I laughed softly. Something like that. He found a particularly exciting part about lead pipes, I think. Michael smiled and his whole face lit up. He had the kindest eyes I'd ever seen, the color of honey in sunlight, warm and gentle. It was one of the first things I'd noticed about him all those years ago. There was something in his gaze that spoke of understanding, of a person who truly cared about others. For almost 3 decades, I'd thought of Michael as simply part of David's world, and by extension, part of mine. He was Uncle Michael to our children when they were small, the patient man who taught them how to skip stones across the pond in the park. Who could point out constellations in the night sky and tell stories about ancient heroes? He was the friend who appeared at our door with hot soup when the flu knocked our whole family flat, who helped David carry heavy furniture up the stairs without being asked. But lately, something had begun to shift. It was nothing I could put my finger on exactly, just a feeling in the quiet moments. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at my garden with a thoughtful expression, or notice the way he'd pause when our conversation died down, as if he had something important to say but couldn't quite find the words. Maybe it was just me getting older, seeing things that weren't really there. At 48, I sometimes wondered if I was becoming too thoughtful about everything. The roses are absolutely beautiful this year, Eleanor, Michael said, his gaze moving to the climbing roses that covered the wooden frame near the porch steps. The red and pink blooms cascaded down like a waterfall of color. You've really outdone yourself this time. They've been easy to work with this season, I replied, running my finger around the edge of my teacup. I think we've had just the right amount of rain and sunshine. Sometimes gardening is more about luck than skill. We sat without talking for several minutes. It was the kind of comfortable silence that only comes from knowing someone for a very long time, through good times and bad times, through ordinary Tuesday afternoons and special holiday celebrations. Usually, I loved these quiet moments with Michael. It felt safe and familiar. But tonight, something was different. The air between us seemed to hum with an energy I couldn't understand. I could sense a restlessness in Michael, a tension in the way he held his shoulders, the way his fingers tapped lightly against the arm of his chair. Something was on his mind. He cleared his throat softly. Actually, Eleanor, I was hoping to talk with you tonight. Alone, I mean. There's something I've been wanting to say to you for a while now. Do you have a few minutes? My heart suddenly beat a little faster, like a bird taking flight in my chest. It wasn't fear exactly, but it wasn't calm either. It was more like anticipation, a feeling that our normal, predictable friendship was about to encounter something unexpected. David was inside, lost in his Roman world. The crickets continued their gentle singing. The evening air was soft and damp with the promise of summer. Of course, Michael, I said, trying to keep my voice steady and normal. I have all the time you need. I gestured toward the house with a small smile. David will be lost in ancient history for at least another hour. When Michael looked at me then, it was different from his usual friendly glances. This look seemed to see past all the years of casual conversation and shared family dinners. I seemed to look directly into some deeper part of who I was. His easy smile was gone, replaced by an expression so serious and vulnerable that it made me catch my breath. Despite the silver in his hair, he looked almost like a young man again, uncertain and hopeful at the same time. This is important, he said, his voice so quiet I had to lean forward to hear him clearly. And it's probably something I should have said a long time ago. The roses, so full and vibrant in their summer glory, seemed to pause in the evening. Breeze, their sweet scent, usually so comforting and familiar, suddenly felt heavy with meaning. My teacup had grown completely cold in my hands. I set it down on the small wooden table between us, and the soft clink of ceramic against wood sounded unusually loud in the sudden stillness. I looked at this man, my husband's closest friend, someone I thought I knew as well as I knew my own reflection, and realized with a shock that maybe I didn't really know him at all, not in the way that truly mattered. The ordinary porch, the fading daylight, the gentle sounds of evening, everything felt like it was balanced on the edge of something new. Something that might change the familiar shape of our lives forever. All right, Michael, I said, my voice coming out softer than I had intended. I'm listening. He took a deep breath, and I watched his gaze drop to his hands, which were now clasped tightly together in his lap. All of his usual relaxed confidence had disappeared, replaced by a nervous energy that seemed to vibrate through his entire body. When he looked up at me again, I saw something in his honey-colored eyes that I had never seen before, a brightness that might have been tears, though I couldn't be sure. It wasn't sadness in his expression, not exactly. It was something much more complicated, a raw, honest emotion that made my own heart ache in response, even though I didn't yet understand why. Eleanor, he began, his voice low and slightly shaky, this isn't easy for me to say, but I need you to know something. Before I continue, my friendship with David, it's one of the most precious things in my life. You both are. Would never want to do anything to hurt that, or to hurt either of you. I nodded slowly, feeling a tight knot form in my stomach. It's the careful way he was. Choosing his words, the gentle rhythm of his voice, told me this wasn't about some small problem he needed advice on. This wasn't a casual conversation about work troubles or family issues. This was something much bigger, much more serious. The air around us seemed to grow thicker, the scent of roses and damp earth becoming almost overwhelming, as if the whole world was holding its breath to hear what he would say next. The crickets continued their cheerful chirping, unaware that anything had changed, but in this small space between our two wicker chairs, a deep quiet had settled, the space where only his next words could exist. I waited. My own breath held, feeling a strange mixture of worry and an unexplainable tenderness growing inside me. The last bit of sunlight caught the silver strands in his hair, making them shine like a brief halo. And for just a moment he looked like a stranger, a man about to reveal a hidden world never knew existed right beside me all these years. Finally, he met my eyes again, and the vulnerability I saw there was so startling, so completely open, that it took my breath away. For a very long time now, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, I felt something for you, Eleanor, something much more than friendship. The world seemed to tip sideways. The cheerful chirping of the crickets faded to a distant hum. The sweet scent of roses suddenly felt too strong, too heavy. My husband's best friend, Michael, steady, reliable Michael, was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. It was an expression of deep longing, of affection mixed with an almost painful honesty. My mind raced, trying to understand his words, trying to fit them into the neat, orderly picture of the life I thought I knew. David was inside, absorbed. In his documentaries about ancient civilizations, our children were grown up now, living their own lives in distant cities. And here, on our familiar porch where we had shared countless ordinary evenings, everything was about to change. The story of our friendship, which I thought I knew by heart, was about to be rewritten entirely. Familiar porch under the gathering dusk, Michael was laying bare a piece of heist that I never suspected Dexted Michael, I started, but my voice trailed off. What could I say? The surprise was a physical thing, a wave that washed over me, leaving me breath less high. Wasn't an unwelcome revelation, not entirely, which was perhaps the most shocking part. There was no revulsion, no immediate anger or indignation, instead a strange, deep echo resonated within me, a sense of something recognized, something that perhaps in the hidden corners of my own heart I had felt too, but had never dared to name. He didn't look away. His gaze held mine steady and unwavering, despite the tremor I could no see in his hands. I know this is Asha Kalanor. Believe me, I've debated with myself 1,000 times whether I should ever say this. For years, I've kept it buried. For David's sake, for your sake, for the sake of the easy, comfortable world we all shared. He paused, a faint troful smile touching his lips, but I'm not getting any younger laner. And some things just demand to be spoken, not because I expect anything to change, not in the way E might think, but because living with this Lance, this unspoken truth has become too heavy. His words hung in the air, potent and transformative. Familiar porch, the fading light, the scent of my roses, everything seemed Tobe cast in a new, sharper relief. He went asking for an affair, not proposing some dramatic upheaval. It was a confession of the heart, pure and simple, yet infinitely complex in its implications. Was offering a truth, a vulnerableness of himself, and in doing so, he was changing the very fabric of our shared history, or at least my understanding of it. The subtle tension I'd felt in Himmerly, the restlessness, it all clicked into place. This was the source, this deep, long-held secret I thought of. David Meisband, my partner for so many years, our life together. The tapestry woven with shared dreams, routines, and the comfortable threads of companionship. This confession wasn't about betraying that. Michael's tone made clear. It felt more like an unveiling, a revelation of an emotional undercurrent that had been flowing silently beneath the surface of our Averadales. My own emotions were a whirlwind's prize, yes, but also a strange sense of validation had I sensed this, had some part of me known on an intuitive level that Michael's affection for me, his attentiveness, his quiet presence held a different quality perhaps, or perhaps I was just now in the light of his words rendering. Decades of small momented glances, quiet conversations, I value you, Ela Lanner. He continued, his voice gaining a little more strength, a little more steadiness. I value your kindness, your intelligence or laughter, the way you see the world over. The years watching you, being around you, it's been one of the quiet joys of me life. And a quiet sorrow to knowing that the boundaries of our relationship were so clearly defined by my friendship with David and your marriage to him. Hewent, trying to flatter me, his words, felt genuine, raw, stripped of any artifice, was the confession of a man who had loved quietly, respectfully from a distance for a very long time, and that changed everything wasn't about a future reaction, but about the now altered perception of the past and present, that knowledge of this unexpressed depth all feeling. From him it was like discovering a hidden room in a familiar house. If finally I found my voice, though it was shaky, Michael. I don't know what to say. I am stunned, I know, he said softly. I didn't say it to make you uncomfortable, to put you in a difficult position. I said it because I needed to for me, and maybe a small part of me hoped that knowing wouldn't be a burden, but perhaps a different kind of connection between us. An honest one, an honest one. The words resonated. How much of our lives were lived around unspoken truths, polite omissions, the careful curation of our rootward selves. He was offering a moment of pure, unadulterated honesty, a rare and precious thing. The fear that had initially gripped me began to subside place by a profound sense of something akin to awe at his courage and awe at the depth of an emotion I had never guessed at. The porch light flickered on, automatically casting a warm amber glow over us, pushing back thin crouching darkness. It felt symbolissimo, as if a light had been switched in a previously shadowed corner. Oh, for lives Michael looked tired suddenly, as if the effort of his confession had drained him. But there was also a new lightness in his eyes. The look of a man who had finally unburdened himself of a heavy load. I thought about the implications, about David, about the comfortable equilibrium of our trio. Would this knowledge shatter it, or could it, as Michael hoped, transform it into something truer, deeper? The path ahead, uncertain, veiled in the twilight butone thing, felt undeniably clear. The ground beneath my feet had shifted, the familiar landscape of my life. The emotional topography I thought I knew so well had been redrawn by his quiet, heartfelt words. The "you won't believe what happened" wasn't a dramatic event in the traditional sense, but an internal earthquake. A profound realignment of understanding. The journey of navigating this new terrain was just beginning. I looked at Michael, truly looked at him, perhaps first time, not as my husband's best friend, but as a man with his own hidden heart, a heart he had just bravely and unexpectedly laid open to me. And in that moment, under the soft glow of the porch light, I felt an immense wave of empathy and a surprising quiet sense of gratitude for his trust. The conversation that evening stretched late, long after David had likely traded Roman aqueducts for the land of dreams. We didn't solve anything, not really. There were no grand declarations made, no promises exchanged beyond the implicit promise of continued respect and care. What Michael had offered was a truth, and what I found myself offering in return was an ear willing to listen and a heart willing to understand, or at least to try. He spoke off moments, small things mostly over the years, a shared laugh over a badly burnt batch of cookies I'd made for a bake sale, a quiet word of encouragement I'd given him when he was doubting a career change, the way I'd fiercely defended a stray cat David had wanted to shoo away. These were the tiny, seeming lion-significant pebbles that had for him built a mountain of affectionate. It wasn't a litany of romantic pining, but rather an acknowledgement of a deep present connection he'd felt, one Thatron parallel to, and was respectful of, my marriage. He emphasized that highs and wavering respect for David and for our life together. He wasn't trying To disrupt it, he was I came. To understand, untween, to integrate this long-held part of himself into the open, perhaps to feel wall, to feel truly seen, even if only beam. As he spoke, I found myself examining my own memories for third times. I had sensed something more in his gaze. A lingering touch when he handed me a cup of coffee, a particular warmth in his smile reserved. Just for me, maybe, or maybe it was the power of suggestion. His confession now coloring the past. It didn't really matter what mattered ways to present this. Newfound knowledge is sitting between us like a fragile, precious ghost. I never wanted to make you feel watched or uncomfortable. Eleanor, he said, his brow furrowed with concern. I ever overstepped, even in my own mind. I am truly sorry. No, Michael, a Dashard. Him, and it was the truth. You've always been a perfect gentleman, Aloeskind, and he had. There was never a moment off impropriety, never a hint off disrespect. If anything, he had always been a steadfast, supportive presence for both of us. Perhaps this deep affection was the very wellspring of that unwavering sport. The most surprising thing was my own reaction. After the initial shock, there wasn't turmoil in the way I have expected. There was a quiet sort of unfolding within me, a sense of being seen, understood, in a way I hadn't realized I'd been missing. It wasn't that David didn't love me or appreciate me, headed in his own steady, quiet way. But David was a man of routine, of comfortable silences, off practicalities. Michael's confession spoke to a different layer. Of being the emotional, the intuitive, the unspoken currents that flow beneath the surface of daily life. What do we do with this? Michael Ifnally asked the question, hanging heavy in the night air which had grown cooler. No, the scent of roses sharper. Mortified, he looked out into the darkness, off the garden for a long moment before answering. I don't know, Eleanor. I truly didn't. I suppose we just know. And we goon being friends, hopefully, even better friends, because there's nothing hidden between us. Anymore, at least not this heg of a small, hesitant smile. Maybe knowing this helps you understand me a bit better, too. Why I'm always around, why I care so much about your family, about your happiness. His words were simple, yet they carried an enormous weight. Of sincerity, he wasn't asking for anything. He was offering an explanation, a piece of his truth. The burden, he had said, was in silence, and now the silence was broken as the first hint of dawn began to police eastern sky. We had talked that longa. Sense of peace settled over me, or at least the beginning of one. It was the peace that comes from confronting complex truth, from looking it in the eye and not flinching. Michael stood to leave, stretching his stiff limbs. He looked older, yes, but also lighter, as if a physical weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Thank you for listening, Englander. He said, his voice raspy, frame hearse of talking. Thank you for no trunning, screaming into the night. Managed a small smile. You're too important, too. Us, Michael, to me, running won't solve anything. I paused, then added, because it felt true, and because I deserved to hear it, and thank you for your honesty. It takes a great deal of courage to say what you've said. Nodded, his honey-cold eyes now wary but clear meeting mine. You're worth that courage, Eleanor. He left as quietly as had arrived, the creak of the gate as of punctuation mark at the end. Off. A profoundly transformative night. I stayed on the porch, watching the sky slowly brighten, the roses beginning to emerge from the shadows, their colors deepening. With the growing light, everything looked the same, yet everything felt different. My husband David was asleep inside, unaware of the emotional earthquake that had just occurred on his own front porch. Michael, his best friend, my friend, was walking away with a lighter heart, having shared a truth that had indeed changed everything, not in a loud, explosive way, but in the quiet, internal way that real change often happens. It changed my perception of the past. It changed the dynamics of the present, and I undoubtedly would shape the future in ways I couldn't yet fathom. The world felt a little wider, a little more complex, and my own heart felt surprisingly open to this new understanding, this unexpected gift of vulnerability from a man I thought I knew, who had just shown me a depth I'd never imagined. And in that moment I knew thought Our friendship, whatever it was, Tobcom, had just stepped onto more sacred.